What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one, I'm going to be talking about the one and only Tesla stock and what you should be looking out for the future. I'm also going to break down why tomorrow is going to be a massive day for the stock market again because we have Jerome Powell speaking once again in front of Congress, and this will actually affect the overall market. It will affect Tesla and also millions of Americans' lives going forward. Now, before I break anything down about tomorrow, before I talk about the news, data, and technicals affecting Tesla and the markets, and give you guys any price predictions, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire Tesla community as a whole. And the last things, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you're guaranteed 7 free stocks, and 5 out of those 7 free stocks can be a free Tesla share. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 3 weeks. Make sure you check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So Tesla was down 3.15% for the day at the time I'm recording this. This is actually just seconds after the market just closed. And right now, guys, the market is actually starting to price in an even more hawkish Fed after what Jerome Powell just said. So Powell did speak today at about 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time. He spoke for over an hour, and he was being interrogated by the U.S. Senate today. Now, tomorrow, Powell is going to be speaking again on Wednesday, right? And he's going to be speaking at about 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time in front of the U.S. House this time. And the U.S. House has more outspoken members, so this could be just as interesting as today. And as I predicted, I told you guys there's a bullish and bearish possibility, but I told you that the odds favored the bearish outcome to actually play out because I told you Powell is more likely to be on the hawkish side. And that's almost exactly what ended up happening today. So, what actually happened? Why is the market selling off the way it is? The answer is Jerome Powell came out and he was being quite hawkish because when he was being interrogated by the US Senate, he couldn't necessarily run away from answers. He couldn't just like hop back and forth or just avoid questions. He had to give us some very straight answers, and they were actually being very strict on him. And they actually got him to say some very, very important things. What did he say? Well, first off, he said there's still lots of work that has to be done. Inflation right now is nowhere near the Fed's target of 2%. He said that the Fed has to continue to tighten and raise rates, and he said the ultimate terminal rate may be even higher than expected, meaning that the Fed has to likely be even more hawkish than before. He also stated that given what's going on, there's a higher than expected probability that unemployment will be even higher, meaning that we could actually see many things that resemble a recession. So Powell actually implicitly stated that. He was being questioned very hard by many different senators, and he actually also stated that it's going to be a bumpy road on the way. That's actually what he said, and I quote, a bumpy road, meaning that Jerome Powell, as at least during the last time he spoke, is stepping away from the soft landing narrative. He was telling us there's going to be a soft landing before. I don't see that anymore. And he even said that that's actually, not as likely as he initially thought. Then he started saying that the Fed may have to be more aggressive. Then he also said that there are no clear signs of confirmed disinflation. So I'm just trying to tell everyone this is exactly what I told you guys before. First, Powell was saying, oh, there's going to be a soft landing. Where's the soft landing? Where is it? I'm not really saying it, to be honest with you guys. Secondly, Jerome Powell started saying, inflation is going to be transitory. He was actually saying that before. Inflation would be transitory. That's obviously not true. High inflation is going to last much longer than expected. It's very sticky. Thirdly, Jerome Powell was saying disinflation. He started screaming disinflation. The whole stock market started to rally. Well, I told you guys there was nothing really fundamentally backing the stock market rally we got a couple of weeks ago when Powell was using the word disinflation because there's a good chance inflation could start to uptick again. Then a few weeks after Jerome Powell said disinflation, the Fed could even pause soon. All of a sudden, inflation was hot again, and we're seeing many signs suggesting that we're going to see another high inflation report from PCE and CPI, and also core might also be a little bit hotter than expected, right? So I was telling you all of this before. Now Powell is starting to repeat my words, and because of that, right? The market is starting to panic a little bit. I wouldn't say that we're capitulating. I don't think the market is just like crying too hard, but there is a little bit of panic now because people are hearing the exact opposite as before of what Powell was saying. So now the market is starting to price in a 50 basis point rate hike. Let me double check this so that this is accurate. We're more than 69% of the way there, meaning that the Fed is now expecting, not the Fed, the markets are expecting the Fed to be more on the hawkish side. Once again, we're at 70.5% of the way there. So we're getting closer and closer to that. Now, Powell is going to be speaking tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time in front of the House. The House are going to be ready. They know what Powell just said. They know this man was not keeping his words in the past, and they know that they have the opportunity to question this guy very hard and get him to admit even more things. So if Powell starts talking more about restrictive policy, if he talks more about a possible recession, I think he's going to be questioned about that even more. He's going to be questioned about the soft landing. He's going to be questioned about so many different things. Guys, this is really going to cause possibly another drop in the stock market. And I'm not saying that this is going to last forever, but I do believe that it's very likely that for the short term, we could see the market drop a little bit more tomorrow. But for the longer term, the medium term, I think an even bigger drop is still pending. And that's because of the fact that as the Fed continues to tighten on its financial conditions, the stress in the credit markets is about to appear, and this in turn is going to lead to more bearish price action. On top of that, the dollar is just skyrocketing to the moon. I was talking about this for many weeks. The dollar is just going up and up and up and up. Let me actually show you on the daily. When the dollar goes up like this is often inversely correlated with the overall market. It tells us that right now the dollar is more enticing for different investors to actually when investors reallocate their funds from different currencies, the dollar looks a lot better. It's getting stronger. And this also tells us that inflation in the USA is likely going up again. That's what this is essentially telling us, right? Not the best of things for the Fed. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about Tesla before I transition back into the charts and what could be playing out. But when it comes to Tesla, there's been a lot of news about investors buying at record paces. And in my opinion, this is some good stuff. But I do believe people have to be very careful at these levels because the more people buy and buy and buy, especially retail, this actually could entice different market makers to cause pain for those investors. And on top of that, the more people keep buying during times like this, the more they have to be very cautious because there's likely going to be some downside for the markets coming, especially after what Powell just said. That's why today was a big day. As far as Tesla goes, there was some big news about Tesla's next generation car, the smaller car. It's mostly going to be autonomously operating, according to Elon Musk. And he's actually keeping his word from a claim he made back in like 2020. Once again, in my opinion, good news for the long term, but for the short term, I don't truly know what this car will look like. So I can't really like solely buy into the company for that. I do believe it's going to come out. It's going to be awesome. And I'm very bullish for like the long term, but I'm just talking about as an investor standpoint, you shouldn't simply buy things based off news and speculation. I do believe Tesla will unveil this in the future. We just don't have it yet. So I'm still going to be cautious, right? For the Tesla Model Y, however, I want to note that the inventory levels are still very, very low, and Tesla recently announced the premium price cuts for their Model Ys and X's. This is once again bullish news for the longer term, in my opinion. Even though demand may have slowed down because of the higher prices, they're cutting prices, which will bring demand up. It may affect their margins, but it's worth the cost to actually get more deliveries and more sales. And this has been working in Tesla's advantage so far. A lot of the data I'm showing you guys does not matter as much just for tomorrow because it's a special day with Powell speaking. Right now, Tesla's underperforming a bit. We have a lowering price pairs ratio. Once again, if this trend does continue, though, it's likely going to lead to even more downside or more weakness from Tesla stock. But once again, it doesn't matter as much specifically just for tomorrow because that also depends on what Jerome Powell ends up saying. On top of that, we don't have too many new gradings. What are those gradings or ratings from different analysts or anything like that? We're just essentially waiting for what else is there to come. The short interest is still relatively low on Tesla. I find that very surprising. Shorts have not piled in very hard just yet. I think they're just still patiently waiting or they're looking for better opportunities. Tesla had relatively low volume. Not really much happened today in terms of it like crashing or getting a big rally, but we did get very important information from the Fed. So now let's talk about what's happening with the markets and the charts. Well, to start us off, Jerome Powell was hawkish, and we are actually seeing the triple Q do something similar to what I anticipated. Now, I told you guys the bullish and bearish possibilities, but I told you the bearish outcome was a lot more likely. And we do have this gap on the triple Q. Uh, the gap is all the way down. Let me see if I could find it. All the way down around this 293 level. So I do believe the triple Q is going to come down there tomorrow, maybe in the morning, as Powell continues to talk. On the 1 hour time frame, we actually have a crossover on the MACD, and there's not really a divergence forming. So I do see some downside in the Nasdaq and tech. This actually did not drop as hard as the S&P 500. So this is telling me tech might see a little bit more downside for tomorrow. For the S&P 500 or the SPY, we have something different developing. Yes, this thing went down, and I mentioned to everyone that if there's a bearish outcome, you have to watch this gap down here in the 397 zone. And I told you I'd see SPY coming down to 397 if Powell was very hawkish, and that's what ended up happening. So because of that, we did fill this gap, but I do believe there's a little bit more downside to come. The RSI is not completely oversold, and there is a lot of bearish momentum. So I think Powell might drag the market down a little bit more to the mid 390 to 393 level. But we have some good news, at least some like small good news for the bulls out there. We do have a possible divergence that could be developing because the RSI, when we were at these low levels, the RSI was between 36 and 40. The RSI hit a low today at about, I think this is about 39. So what this tells me is, so far, okay, yes, the market could come down more, and if this RSI remains around this level or even lower, the RSI can make a new low. The RSI could get lower, but the overall price of the SPY or the S&P 500, whichever one you want to use, could be making a higher low. Maybe our low is around like 395 or so, somewhere around there. And that's forming a divergence, meaning we could get a counter trend rally to end this week. It's a possibility. But to me personally, I do not necessarily care too much about that. Even if we do get a small bounce, overall, the trend is shifting more in the bearish direction. And I believe the bears are gaining the edge because as financial conditions tighten, as inflation continues to go up, as we see stress in the credit markets, as we're seeing more and more talks about a recession, all these things are fueling more and more fear. And I believe the market has more downside to come, regardless of if we get a bounce or not. But I do believe we might get a bounce, maybe not tomorrow, but by like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, one of those days. And part of that's because of the options chain. You can see right here on the options chain, we don't really care too much about tomorrow. It's very, very feeble and small. But by the time we get to Friday, we actually have a 2.08 put to call ratio. And also for next Friday, it's at 2.12. So the market makers are incentivized to maybe let the market drop today, maybe for tomorrow, maybe for a small part of Wednesday, but they're incentivized to actually trap a lot of shorts and actually push the market up by Thursday and Friday. So the market might actually flip by the end of the week. It's a possibility. Am I promising it? The answer is no. And even if we do flip a little bit by the end of the week, I still see more downside later on. I need to be clear about that. I still see more downside later on. By the time we get to like the end of March, going into April, I see a lot more downside. I see SPY coming down pretty hard. So to me, yeah, a bounce could come. That's a good opportunity to reposition shorts if that's what you want to do. Non-financial advice, but I just want to let you all know that that's a real possibility. For tomorrow, I am seeing more downside. I do think SPY is going to come down a little bit more to the mid to low 390s, 393 to 395 or so, but we could try to bounce possibly by the end of the week. It's a possibility. If it doesn't come though, it is what it is. Like I said before, I was telling you there's more downside anyways. All right. Please be ready for that. Now, talking about the dollar, like I said, this thing is ripping to the upside, very, very bullish. But we're seeing momentum slow down a little bit up here around this 105 area. We have tough resistance here. It could actually push a little more and maybe kind of slow down just a little bit before this thing does continue. If it does slow down by the end of the week, this could actually help the markets at least just a little bit for a small bounce. But going into like the next few weeks, the dollar still looks super bullish on the daily. The dollar is going to continue to rip. Inflation is going to continue to go up, and we're likely going to see more pain in the stock market because of that. For the VIX, I told everyone, if you were watching me on this channel, that because of how SPY performs, we're going to see the VIX likely continue to drop and then maybe get a bounce off either 18 or 17.83. 143, around that zone right there, which is very close to where the top of this falling wedge was. Previous resistance is going to become support. So I did expect a bounce in the VIX very soon. So I predicted that we'd probably see this thing very close to 18 or so, 17.8 and bounce. And we actually got a bounce and we're back at 19.62. So we might see the VIX try to get back to like 20 tomorrow, which means we could see more downside once again. But there's no guarantee it's just going to rip immediately. We might see some chop a little bit by the time we get to like Thursday or Friday, maybe. I'm saying that based off the options chain and what the market makers' intents may be. Finally, before I end the video and talk about Tesla, let's just talk about Apple real quick. Apple right now, it did end up coming down like I told you guys. I told you it was very likely Apple would try to fill this gap. Apple has successfully filled the gap, I believe, but we do have another gap all the way down here in the mid 140s. So if Apple doesn't necessarily hold 149.6 to about 150, this is where the 0.236 retracement line happens to be. If Apple fails at 150 to 149 ish, it's going to come all the way down and try to fill the gap in the mid 140s, most likely, if it cannot hold 150 to 149. All right, be prepared for that because that can mean more downside for the overall market. And that could actually help the QQQ fill its gap all the way down there. That's a real possibility. But once again, Apple did bounce off 143 in the past. It could try to bounce later into this week. It's a real possibility for like Thursday and Friday. Once again, causing pain for shorts. That's what the market makers would likely want to do. It does benefit them. Not guaranteeing it, but it is a real possibility. But regardless of if we get a bounce at the end of the week or not, after we drop, tomorrow and later on, if we do drop and get a bounce later on, the bounce doesn't matter too much to me. The overall trend is more in favor of the bears based off fundamentals, based off what's happening with the yields, based off what's happening to the overall market, and based off what's happening to inflation and the Fed and the tightening of financial conditions. Finally, when it comes to the 10-year Treasury yield, let me just talk about this before Tesla. We do have a gap up here. This thing might try to fight for above the 40 level. If it does break above 40, we could try to fill the gap around the mid 40 zone. If that happens, this could be bearish for the stock market, which is why I've been saying there could be a little bit more downside for tomorrow. But if it gets rejected right here, it could get rejected off like 41 to like 40.91. If that happens, once again, we could see a bounce by the time we get to Thursday or Friday. But then after that, going into the medium term, I still see more downside. All right, so for Tesla, what does all of this mean? Well, let's talk about the key levels first. If Tesla wants to push up, all right, if you look at the 1 hour time frame, right, if Tesla tries to get a nice bounce, we have some major resistance right here around this 194 zone. Then we also have resistance around, I'm going to be watching like close to about 200 if we could break above 194 to 195. 200 is going to have some resistance followed by this resistance line around this 204-ish level, somewhere around here. So Tesla does have some major resistance ahead of it, but I do believe that that's going to be known as the bullish possibility if there is something that causes the market to bounce out of nowhere. I'm not really seeing that playing out. I just wanted to note that as a possibility. If you're bearish on Tesla, you have to watch this 186 zone. I'm going to actually adjust this so that 186 is covered. 186 to 189 is like where Tesla's main demand zone happens to be. And you'll notice that every time Tesla's touching 186, it's trying to bounce off of that. It doesn't really want to, drop too low below that. It wants to bounce off 186. And what this is essentially telling me is we do have a bearish structure here where we keep testing it, we bounce, we test it, we bounce, we test it. It's likely not going to hold, especially because we are forming this bearish triangle-like structure. So this is telling me that there's an increased probability that this demand zone might not hold, especially for tomorrow, since we might see Powell end up smacking the markets down once he's interrogated by the House. If that happens at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, we could see Tesla break below 186 and start to fill its gap, which happens to be in the low 180s. There's a gap down here somewhere. Might be a little bit hard to see, but I think it's like right about here, around this 182 level. We might see Tesla come all the way down to the low 180s tomorrow. If and only if, I'm using the word if, Powell does cause even more downside for the markets and the markets to react that way. So tomorrow depends heavily on the on what Powell says and how the market responds. The odds of Powell causing a bounce tomorrow are very low, seeing how he was speaking today and how he's struggling to actually get around some questions. He has to be honest with us. With that said, the odds favor Tesla may be coming down a little bit lower and breaking below 186. So please be prepared for that just in case. Now, if Tesla does break below 186 and it continues to drop to like the lower 180s, it could try to bounce off that and try to hold above 180. That's very possible. But here's what I want you to remember: the market makers who are watching this, they will benefit if they let the market drop. If the market drops hard, like tomorrow, maybe for Wednesday, we kind of hold low levels so that lots of shorts pile in. And when the shorts start piling in very, very hard, they want to cause pain for shorts. So they might try, and this is just a big might, I don't know for sure. And I'm saying this because of the possible bullish divergence that could be developing on SPY. We have a possible bullish divergence that could develop if the RSI drops a lot lower, which is still very possible. If that plays out, the market could bounce on Thursday, maybe on Friday, to squeeze some shorts, to scare them, destroy them. That's how the market makers make their money. If that happens, maybe Tesla comes down for tomorrow, maybe it comes down for Wednesday, and we see this thing in the low 180s, somewhere around there, 180. Tesla could still bounce with the overall market by Thursday and Friday. It will depend on some jobs data and other things coming out. I think we actually have unemployment coming out on Friday. That's going to be very important as well. That will also affect how the market interprets the data. But what I'm trying to say is there is a chance we might try to bounce on Thursday or Friday, and Tesla might try to come back to these levels, once again hurting lots of shorts. It's a real possibility. However, if that does happen, please do not let euphoria get the best of you. Remain very rational and be prepared for anything just in case. And just remember, even though the market could go all over the place, whether we get a balance at the end of the week or not, for the next couple of weeks, the next few months, I'm actually more in favor of the bears because of what Powell said, because of the inflation possibly going up, the dollar index and what it's doing, what the yields are essentially doing, and so many different factors. All right. So I do believe the bearish outcome is likely going to play out for the much longer term going into like April and May. And I do think Tesla is going to come down to much lower levels by the time we get to those months. So I want to prepare you all for that. We have a big gap down here in the 140s. It is very possible that Tesla could fill that gap if the market does get a big hit over the next few weeks to months. Okay. I want to make that as clear as possible, okay? I want you all to be very prepared for that. But, anyways, for tomorrow, I gave you guys my levels. I told you we're most likely going to see Powell continue to be hammered and be more hawkish. Be ready for it and do what you have to do. Tesla to the moon, because the long term future is still incredibly bright. And peace out.